Welcome to Update Wednesday. It's April 30th, 2025. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi.
Today, we're doing a deep dive, really looking closely at the global economic and geopolitical picture using the sources you've sent our way.
Right. The goal is to pull out the key insights, help you understand what's actually going on behind the headlines.
We'll start with the global economy and markets. We'll cover that. Then you'll give us the China update.
Yep, covering China. And then we'll round things off with updates from S2 Underground and some U.S. news.
Sounds good. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. So global economics, you really can't talk about that right now without focusing on the U.S.-China trade situation.
Yeah.
President Trump's tariffs, they're now at 145% on a lot of Chinese goods.
Which is huge.
It is. And we're seeing the impact reflected in China's own numbers. Their official manufacturing PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index.
Yeah, the factory activity gauge.
Exactly. It slipped to 49 in April. And anything below 50, well, that means contraction.
So, shrinking. And 49 is the weakest since, what, December 2023?
That's right. Robin Zhang over at Morgan Stanley basically said, this is definitely worse than expected, and shows tariffs started to bite.
And it's not just the big state-owned enterprises, is it? The Caixin PMI, which looks more at smaller private companies.
Right, more export-focused ones.
Their new export orders took a massive dive, the fastest plunge since July 2023.
Which tells you international demand is really drying up. And it hits jobs, too. Employment in manufacturing reportedly deteriorated sharply.
So it makes you wonder about China's growth target. They were aiming for 5% this year.
Yeah, Bloomberg analysts Chang Shu and Eric Jewell are saying meeting that target now looks very difficult.
The trade data seems to back that up.
Oh, absolutely. U.S.-bound trade from China just collapsed by mid-April. Think about this. Bookings for those standard 20-foot shipping containers China to the U.S. Down 45%. 45% year on year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not just a dip, that's a serious drop-off. It signals major shifts in supply chains.
Exactly, and you see it at the ports. Port of Los Angeles arrivals. Expected to be down by about a third.
Oof.
Air freight bookings have plunged, too. So retailers here, like Walmart and Target, they're warning about potential empty shelves.
And higher prices for consumers, inevitably.
Right. Jay Foreman, the CEO of Basic Fun, that's a toy company, he called the tariffs a de facto embargo. He's predicting orders just getting canceled left and right.
A de facto embargo. Strong words.
Yeah. And get this. Even small stuff, goods under $800 that used to be exempt.
The de minimis threshold.
Exactly. They're now facing import charges that can cost more than the item itself. Like a power strip for $19.49 now has over $27 in taxes slapped on it.
Which basically makes importing those items impossible, or at least completely uneconomical. Hits everyday goods hard.
Totally. And some companies are already passing it on. Shein apparently raised some U.S. prices by over 300%.
300%.
Yeah. Now, here's a weird blip. The U.S. trade deficit actually hit a record $162 billion in March.
How does that work?
Well, the thinking is companies rushed imports before the tariffs fully kicked in, like a last dash.
Okay. Pulling forward demand.
Right. But the forecast now is for a big drop, maybe 7% fewer imports in Q2. And this gloom is hitting GDP forecasts, too. JP Morgan, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, they've all downgraded Q1 GDP.
To negative territory.
Yep, predicting contractions anywhere from negative 0.8% to negative 1.75%.
Ouch.
And maybe the most telling sign, consumer confidence. The Conference Board's index, lowest since May 2020.
Right back to the early pandemic days. That's a serious signal. People are feeling the pinch, feeling uncertain.
No doubt. It affects spending, everything.
Right.
Now, let's zoom in a bit. Look at Texas. It's a huge industrial state.
What's the picture there?
Well, factory activity is still growing slightly, production index at 5.1, but the outlook, much darker. New orders just plummeted down 20 points to negative 20.
Negative 20. And historically, when new orders drop like that?
It often signals a wider downturn is coming. Capacity utilization is down slightly. Shipments index went negative for the first time this year. The Dallas Fed data basically suggests the worst outlook since the pandemic hit.
And you see that ripple through, right?
Yeah.
Fewer orders mean less need for capacity, fewer shipments, which then impacts jobs.
Exactly. The labor market signs in Texas. Slight drop in headcounts, shorter work weeks. Hours worked index slipped to negative 6.4.
So firms are cutting hours.
Seems like it. And overall business activity fell 20 points to negative 35.8. Again, lowest since May 2020.
What about prices versus wages there?
That's the other squeeze. Price pressures are accelerating in Texas, but wage growth is flat. So costs are up, but pay isn't keeping pace.
Classic stagflation pressure then. Rising prices, slowing activity.
Looks like it. And businesses there aren't optimistic either. The Future General Business Activity Index pushed further negative, down to -5.2.
Not a great sign for the coming months. Is this Texas pain unique, or are there wider signs?
Unfortunately, it looks wider. The head of the LA port, he's giving a bleak outlook. Expects cargo to drop 35% in just 2 weeks because shipments from China have basically stopped.
35% in 2 weeks. That's abrupt.
It is. And companies are reacting. UPS, planning 20,000 job cuts this year.
Yeah.
They're citing dropping discretionary spending, pulling back from Amazon Business too.
People tightening their belts.
Seems so.
Yeah.
Cisco cut its outlook, worried about people dining out less. JetBlue pulled its guidance, seeing travel demand slow down.
And
GM suspended their guidance and froze share buybacks, directly blaming the Trump tariffs.
That's a direct hit to shareholder value, potentially. Big ripples.
Huge. And, maybe not surprisingly, Trump's approval rating reportedly fell to 39%. The big drags, inflation and, yes, tariffs.
Makes sense. People feel those directly.
Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Bent is talking about getting new tax benefits ready by July 4th, incentives to build factories here in the U.S.
Trying to counter the downturn with incentives. We'll see if that works, or if it's too late.
Right. Now, quick shift elsewhere globally. Spain, they declared a state of emergency on Monday. Massive blackout.
What headlines? How bad was it?
Knocked out 15 gigawatts. That's like 60% of their demand. Gone.
60%? What happened?
Grid operator called it a very strong oscillation. Basically knocked Spain off the European grid. Madrid, Lisbon hit hard. Transport, networks, daily life just halted.
Wow. And Spain relies heavily on renewables, right? Wind and solar.
Yeah, about 43%. So this immediately sparked debate about grid stability, managing intermittent sources.
It's the big challenge with the energy transition. Needs storage, robust connections.
For sure. Okay, one more stop. Japan. Their industrial production fell 1.1% in March, worse than expected.
What's dragging it down?
Autos, electronics, machinery, key sectors are weak. An analyst at Norinchukin Research Institute said, basically, the U.S. tariffs are just starting to hit Japanese industry.
So the ripple effect continues.
Yep. And Canon reportedly slashed its profit forecast by 10%, citing U.S. tariffs and the stronger yen. Export growth also slowed down there, so pressure points all over. Okay, let's turn to you, China. What are you seeing?
Well, thanks. The picture in China is definitely looking complex. And there are these reports, trickling out, suggesting maybe public sentiment is shifting, growing frustration amidst the economic hardship.
How so? What kind of signs?
You see it online sometimes, comments hinting at potential retaliation because things are tough economically. And while the official story is still around 5% GDP growth last year,
there's skepticism about that number.
Quite a bit. Price signals actually suggest deflation, which could mean the economy is much weaker underneath. Plus, they're still wrestling with all that debt from the 2008 stimulus.
Right, the debt overhang. And the property market. Still shaky.
Very much so. The mortgage crisis is ongoing. Remember, we talked about that before. My video on it even got demonetized initially.
Yeah, sensitive topic. Any visible signs of this discontent you mentioned?
There have been a couple of incidents. Around mid-April, someone hung pro-democracy banners on a bridge in Chengdu.
Really? What do they say?
Things like, without political system reform, there's no national rejuvenation, criticizing unchecked party power. The person identified, Milshinglan, 27, apparently had a labor dispute. But doing that is incredibly risky.
Absolutely. Takes guts or desperation.
Yeah. And there are anecdotes, too. A teenager apparently complaining publicly about the trade war, rising prices, no jobs, businesses closing. And protests over unfinished apartments, those continue.
And people getting hurt.
Reports say owners are being beaten, arrested, just for demanding what they paid for. And you have to remember, for so many Chinese families, their wealth is tied up in property. Maybe 70% back in 2022 data.
So when developers like Evergrande have problems,
it hits average people hard. And the whole model, where local governments relied on selling land leases, created some, let's say, perverse incentives for maybe unsustainable growth.
Right.
Then there was this really shocking incident in Guangdong province. A local government secretary was reportedly beaten to death by someone petitioning the government.
Beaten to death.
Yes. And the public reaction online reportedly wasn't entirely sympathetic to the official. Some posts seemed to almost celebrate it, which really speaks to some deep anger out there.
Wow. That's intense.
There's also criticism aimed higher up, like Xi Jinping apparently banning Boeing planes for airlines but using them himself. and an unverified story about the Chinese-made C-99 jet having some kind of incident landing in a field.
So a mix of economic pain and political discontent bubbling up. What about specific sectors, like agriculture?
Agriculture, especially the fruit industry, seems like a microcosm of the instability. Reports describe wholesale markets just deserted, tons of produce literally rotting because no one's buying or prices are too low.
Farmers having to destroy their own crops.
Yes, mangoes, jujubes, just dumping them. Prices at the farm gate are apparently rock bottom, but then transport costs are so high that the fruit is still expensive for consumers in the cities.
A broken supply chain almost.
Feels like it. Surplus oranges, blueberries, grapes, watermelons, even vegetables like chili peppers and cabbage. Farmers' livelihoods are just wrecked. Farming is becoming a losing game for many.
And natural disasters on top of that.
Yeah, tornadoes, sandstorms, destroying crops, plus those U.S. tariffs we talked about, up to 245% on some things. That cuts off export markets for Chinese fruit growers, too. It's a perfect storm for them.
It sounds like a huge gap between the official narrative and the reality on the ground.
That seems to be a recurring theme. There are accusations the CCP uses propaganda, lies, to paint this picture of prosperity, but it makes it hard for people to speak out about the struggles.
How so?
Well, there was this one creator on Bilibili, that's like Chinese YouTube, who was just filming the real lives of ordinary folks, showed the difficulties. Videos got deleted, creator apparently questioned by police, just for showing reality. Netizens reacted, pointing out how truth gets suppressed. Another guy, Hu Chen, focused on the tough lives of the elderly accounts banned.
So trying to show the hardship gets you silenced.
Seems that way. There was this quote from a Chinese merchant going around saying, making money now is like looking for a needle in a haystack. That really captures the mood.
Needle in a haystack.
Oh, even Lunar New Year, usually a huge spending period. Reports said markets were dead quiet, businesses struggling, empty shopping malls in big cities like Shanghai, small traders saying it's the worst business they've seen in over a decade.
That's bleak. What about the EV sector? That's been a huge growth area for China. Any issues there?
Yeah, even the EV boom seems to be hitting some bumps. There was an incident at a car show. A Huawei AITO M7 Pro apparently lost control.
Lost control at a show.
Yeah, crashed into 4 other cars, injured someone. Huawei's explanation, something about it not being in exhibition mode, driver error, sharp turn, got a lot of flack online.
People didn't buy it.
Not really. Surveillance footage seemed to show low speed initially, kind of undermining their tech claims. And the bit about the seatbelt disabling emergency braking, that also raised eyebrows.
Sounds messy. Are there other safety concerns? Fires.
There have been quite a few reports, actually. A truck carrying EVs caught fire, destroyed several cars. A BYD Song L hit a truck, then reportedly smoked, exploded, and burned completely.
Burned? Completely?
Yeah. A NIO EV also burned badly, leading to online comments questioning, the strength of the materials. Even newer models like the Luxeed R7, that's Huawei and Chery, apparently getting lots of owner complaints despite selling well.
Any other anecdotes?
Well, there's this story from a used car dealer. Maybe take it with a grain of salt, but he said he nearly lost a finger handling an EV. Raised some safety questions.
Okay. And more serious fires.
There was a really bad one in Rongshan County. Destroyed a whole street. Online chatter blamed a BYD Seagull charging pile explosion, but the fire department denied any EV connection, and posts about it got deleted.
Deleted posts again, covering things up.
That's the suspicion in some quarters. Then there's the Xiaomi SU7. Involved in a fatal crash, 3 students killed, reportedly using the smart driving mode. That incident kind of faded, but then another SU7 accident happened, killed 2 cyclists. Xiaomi blamed the fire starting from the electric bike's battery, but eyewitnesses apparently disputed that.
Controversial.
Very. And Xiaomi seems protective of the SU7's image. A vlogger compared it to a rival, the Zeekr Zelo 7, and ended up sued and reportedly detained by Xiaomi.
Sued and detained for a car review.
Apparently. There are also technical concerns being raised about the SU7, like doors not opening after a crash because the electronic handles lost power from battery damage.
No mechanical backup.
Critics say no. And its battery design, the cell-to-chassis where cells are part of the structure, questions about crash protection compared to traditional battery packs.
Seems like a lot of criticism bubbling up around domestic EVs.
There is. An online repair guy, Dragon Brother, known for critiquing EVs, is apparently facing lawsuits from 3 different Chinese car makers.
Trying to silence critics again.
Looks like a pattern. BYD reportedly launched a cleanup action back in 2021, going after negative online comments threatening big lawsuits. Huawei was accused of covering up a fire involving an ArcFox vehicle. Staff allegedly removed logos without permission.
So is the criticism that they're using hype and nationalism over solid engineering?
That's definitely part of the critique. Relying on propaganda, exaggerated claims, appeals to patriotism to build loyalty, even when there are issues. And you see footage of drivers totally misusing the autonomous features.
Sleeping at the wheel, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Sleeping, reclining, not paying attention. Even though Huawei's CEO claimed their system meets L3 standards, allowing sleep. But then a BYD Denza crashed during an autonomous driving demo on a highway.
Not exactly confidence-inspiring.
Not really, and Xiaomi's CEO claimed their system is the best, personally tested it with zero intervention. But netizens are raising red flags, technical issues, battery fires, too much focus on gimmicks, not enough on core safety.
Like basic things, brakes, structure.
Yeah, criticism about flimsy bumpers, inadequate brakes on some models, and worries about marketing these super fast, accelerating cars to young, maybe inexperienced drivers.
Interesting. You saw one comment, trusting Tesla more.
Yeah, someone explicitly said they trust Tesla over the Chinese brands, despite everything. It's a complex picture. But let's shift gears again. There's also this whole angle about U.S. military preparations, potentially related to China.
Right, the geopolitical dimension. What's the source material saying there?
Well, it's reporting that the U.S. is actively preparing for a potential conflict with China, often citing Taiwan as a possible flashpoint, maybe around 2027.
Preparations how?
A key example cited is the deployment of the Typhoon missile system to the Philippines last year. These are land-based missiles capable of hitting major Chinese cities.
That sounds significant.
It is. Reportedly the first time since the Cold War, the U.S. has put a system like that outside its own borders. The sources point to bipartisan consensus in Washington for a more confrontational stance towards China.
And linking it back to the trade war.
Yes, framing the Trump administration's 145% tariffs as part of an economic war. And noting Trump's vows to massively increase military spending, maybe over $1 trillion.
$1 trillion for defense? Where's that money coming from?
Reports suggest planned cuts to social spending, while people like Elon Musk are supposedly being brought in to oversee government efficiency.
Musk involved now.
That's what some sources claim. And the foreign policy team. Trump reportedly picked neoconservative hawks, including Pete Hegseth as defense secretary.
Big Seth. What's his background?
He's described himself as a crusader, wrote a book, American Crusade, apparently framing things as a holy war against China, the international left, and Islam, called for overthrowing the Chinese government.
Crusader. Holy war. That's strong language for a defense secretary.
Very strong. And the Washington Post apparently reported on an internal Pentagon memo from Hegseth dated March 2025.
What did the memo say?
It told the military to prepare for war with China, made countering China the #1 goal. Apparently, sections were lifted word for word from a Heritage Foundation report.
So, aligning policy with think tank recommendations.
Seems like it. The memo outlines Trump's vision. Prepare for and win a potential war against Beijing. It even suggested the U.S. should accept risks elsewhere, like in Europe, to focus entirely on China as the sole pacing threat.
Pacing threat. What does that mean exactly?
It's a term that emerged, identifying China as the top competitor economically, technologically, politically, militarily. The idea is the U.S. needs to keep pace with, or ahead of, China's development.
And Taiwan is central to this.
According to these sources, yes. The U.S. goal is framed as preventing mainland China from reintegrating with Taiwan, potentially using Taiwan as a strategic military outpost.
Is that a new idea?
Historically, the U.S. had nukes in Taiwan during the First Cold War, even considered using them in '58. More recently, the U.S. has increased troop presence there, sold billions in weapons, quietly arming Taiwan to the teeth, as one source put it.
What about the official One China policy?
The argument is the U.S. has been eroding it, despite formally acknowledging it, supporting separatists in Taiwan, for example.
But what do people in Taiwan want?
Polls consistently show the vast majority, over 80%, prefer the current status quo, not immediate independence.
Interesting. And what about TSMC, the chip giant?
The U.S. definitely wants influence, if not control, over TSMC, been pushing them to move production to the U.S.
So, Hegseth's role. What else has he done?
He visited Japan and the Philippines in March, told allies the U.S. is with you against China, announced a joint warfighting headquarters with Japan.
Warfighting headquarters.
Yeah, lots of rhetoric about peace through strength, reviving the warrior ethos, claim they're working against communist Chinese aggression, though sources note China hasn't fought a war since '79, while the U.S. has had hundreds of interventions.
That's quite a contrast.
Hegseth also mentioned Admiral Paparo, head of Indo-Pacific Command, making real war plans and creating strategic dilemmas for China.
And the Philippines' role?
Seen as a key proxy now. The U.S. gained access to new military bases there under the current pro-U.S. president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. So the message to Asia is commitment, while maybe signaling less focus on Europe.
And tech companies are involved.
Big time. Silicon Valley firms, the ones who are also Pentagon contractors, are reportedly building weapons specifically for a potential war with China.
Like who?
A Wall Street Journal report mentioned tech bros betting they can help win a war with China. Palmer Luckey's company, Anduril Industries.
The VR guy.
Yeah, Oculus founder. His new company makes autonomous weapons drones, subs reportedly focused on conflict with China by 2027.
Anduril. Like Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. Named after Aragorn's sword. He's apparently inspired by anime villains too, quotes Seto Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh! Palantir, another Lord of the Rings name, is also a major player working with Anduril.
Palantir, Peter Thiel's company.
Yep. Both backed by Thiel, who mentored VP J.D. Vance. It points to this massive influx of venture capital into military tech.
More than government R&D spending.
Reportedly, yes. VC funding in military tech has ballooned. Investors apparently spent 70% more in the last 3 years than any prior year, $130 billion total from 2021-2024. The Pentagon spends maybe $90 billion a year on R&D itself.
So the military-industrial complex is getting more private, more VC funded.
That's the argument. And the goal, according to these sources, is ultimately to preserve the U.S. position in the world by directly challenging China's rise. It's a very confrontational picture being painted.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's quickly touch on the S2 Underground update. What stood out?
Sure. From The Wire on April 29th. In Canada, the Liberals won a narrow election. Mark Carney stays PM. Brazil had that flight disturbance seem like a mental health issue. Sweden saw a tragic shooting in a hair salon, 3 killed, suspected gang violence related to immigration issues.
Right.
New Mexico, Jose Luis Cano and his wife released on bond. And that really disturbing case in Kansas City, Missouri.
The paramedic stabbing.
Yeah, firefighter-paramedic Graham Hoffman fatally stabbed by a patient, Shanita Bozel. She'd just been released on bail, despite recent violent incidents trying to break into a police car, biting an officer trying to stab someone else.
At least on bail after all that.
Apparently, the analyst commentary highlighted the risks of releasing clearly violent individuals back into the community.
A tragic story. Okay, finally, any other major U.S. news points? You mentioned Stephen Van Meter's analysis earlier regarding Texas.
Yeah, his analysis, Texas collapses nationwide crash imminent, really digs into those Texas numbers we discussed. He emphasizes that while manufacturing output was still growing slightly in April, the outlook tanked worse since the pandemic.
The falling new orders, right?
Exactly. That massive 20-point drop to -20 in new orders, plus the negative turn in capacity use and shipments. He points out historically, these order slowdowns are reliable recession predictors, like in the early 2000s, 2008, 2013, 2018, 2021.
So Texas could be the canary in the coal mine for the whole U.S.
That's the argument. The General Business Activity Index plunging to -35.8 reinforces that, and the labor market softening, fewer jobs, shorter weeks.
And the price-wage squeeze we talked about.
Right. Prices rising from tariffs, but paychecks shrinking or stagnant. Big stagflation risk. The future outlook indices are also deeply negative, suggesting businesses don't see relief coming soon.
Does this extend beyond manufacturing in Texas? Services? Retail?
Yes. The services sector saw growth resume, but outlooks there also worsened. Employment fell. Price pressures rose in services too, but wages were stable again. That squeeze. Future outlook negative there as well, down to -16.
And retail?
Retail labor market indicators suggested falling employment and shorter work weeks too. Employment index plunged to -8.1. Retailers are pessimistic about broader conditions.
And this connects back to the ports.
Absolutely. The LA port chief forecasting that 35% cargo drop in 2 weeks because China shipments stopped. That's a direct consequence.
Yeah.
The Longshoremen's Union is saying Trump's tariffs hurt the working class.
We're seeing the corporate reactions too. UPS, Cisco, JetBlue, GM.
All pulling back, cutting outlooks, blaming tariffs or slowing demand. GM freezing buybacks is a big signal for the stock market, potentially.
And Trump's approval rating taking a hit.
Down to 39%, with inflation and tariffs as top concerns, which might explain Treasury Secretary Bent wanting that tax bill by July 4th.
What were those proposals again?
Trump floated no tax on tips, Social Security, overtime, and making auto loan interest deductible.
Trying to offer some relief. But will it be enough? Or too late?
That's the fear. If stagflation sets in, tax cuts might not stop a recession. The latest JOLTS data showed job openings down to the lowest since September 21.
Fewer job openings.
Right. Layoffs dropped, but more people quit, maybe taking buyouts. Suggests weakening demand for workers. Employers are hitting pause on spending because of all this tariff uncertainty.
So stagflation risk near 100%, according to some economists.
That's what some are saying. Higher prices, slower growth, rising unemployment. The Dallas Fed survey insiders literally cited tariff uncertainty as a major headache.
And it becomes a cycle, right? Falling capacity use leads to cuts in hours, then fewer job openings.
Exactly. And we're seeing it hit services, employment, and work ones too now, not just manufacturing. It's broadening out.
Wow. Okay, it's definitely clear we're in a really complex, interconnected global moment right now. These economic waves from trade policy are crashing everywhere, across sectors, borders, and the China situation adds layers upon layers of challenge.
For sure. Which leads to maybe a final thought for you listening. As you hear all this trade wars, blackouts, EV issues, military posturing, recession fears, how do you see these pieces fitting together? Are they separate events or deeply linked? And what might the long-term consequences be? How could these shifts reshape our world in the coming years?
Definitely something to chew on as we keep tracking these stories. For more deep dives and updates on all these critical issues, please do like and subscribe.